Hi, I'm Lara Torvey, a producer at Solve for X Innovations to Change the World. We're currently hard at work on the next season of the show, but in the meantime, please enjoy this bonus episode recorded live at the Mars Impact Health Conference last spring.
And when people say to me they're not studying women or they're not using female models because they're too complex, I say to them, if we had been studying female models all along and somebody came up to us and said we had to start studying males, I would say they're not complex enough to really give us a good view on the complexity of biology.
That's Gillian Einstein. She runs the Einstein Lab of Cognitive Neuroscience, Gender, and Health at the University of Toronto. She joined Minna Woo, the director of the Banting and Best Diabetes Center at U of T, to discuss how tailored interventions are key to improving health outcomes for women. As both of them argue, ignoring gender differences, or worse, defaulting to male models, is just bad science.
It takes resource, right? It takes resource to do proper trials, to do proper experiments, and basically to do them separately literally means it's going to cost twice as much, right? And this is why, you need to invest, right? And this is why some people without the resource have to choose, and unfortunately, the default is male.
Both Gillian and Minna have spent many decades working in medicine. They've seen the field's understanding of gender and sex evolve, but they've also actively shaped that understanding. In their research on diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer, they've demonstrated time and again how life experience and biology are profoundly intertwined and affect everybody's health. Here, recorded live on May 8th, 2025 at the Mars Impact Health Conference, are Gillian Einstein and Minna Woo in conversation with journalist Katherine Ward of Global News.
Thank you both for joining me here on stage. We're talking about precision treatment for women's health. And it's a great topic, and in my work as a national journalist, it's something that comes up time and time again as I speak with scientists from across our country and the amazing work that they do, and that there are differences in how we approach health with regards to a gender lens. And what I always find interesting is that some people are very surprised by this, and other people think, how can you be surprised by this? This is something that's been happening for decades. And I hope that our conversation today sort of shines light on some of those aspects. So to kick us off, I wanted to give both of you the floor to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit more about how you are building a more complete understanding about how sex and gender shapes brain and behavior, and specifically as it relates to health outcomes for women.
Sure, delighted. Thank you. I'm Gillian Einstein. I run the Einstein Lab of Cognitive Neuroscience, Gender, and Health at the University of Toronto. And the big question in my lab is, why do more women than men have Alzheimer's disease? It may not surprise this group that at least twice as many women as men have Alzheimer's disease. And as we know now, Alzheimer's disease isn't something that strikes you like a cold. It doesn't just happen at the age of 68. It starts very early in life. And so what we're trying to understand in my lab is what are some of the earliest signs of Alzheimer's disease as it progresses in women who are at early midlife but have had a procedure that actually places them at twice the risk of Alzheimer's disease at the end of life as women who didn't have this procedure. What is the procedure? It's ovarian removal. The removal of ovaries before the age of 50 has been shown to lead to a higher all causes of death later in life, and in particular, twice the risk of Alzheimer's disease. So this is an early life event, which I think of as being gendered, because we don't think too hard about removing the ovaries, whereas we would think pretty hard about removing somebody's testes, I think. Now, many of the women do this because they really have no choice. It's their best move for prolonged life, especially in the case of women who carry the breast cancer mutation, which raises their risk of breast and ovarian cancer. But at the average age of 42, what we're finding in our studies is that these women already have cognitive, behavioral, and brain signs that are early markers for Alzheimer's disease. They have a decrement in what we call verbal episodic memory, remembering lists, remembering stories. They have a loss in spatial working memory, like remember where you parked your car downstairs. And they also have changes in brain regions. So they have changes in a place called the hippocampus that's incredibly important for making new memories and is one of the earliest sites for Alzheimer's disease. And we find also that they have disordered sleep, which may be an important place for intervention. And one of the things that I've learned, actually I've learned two very important things. One very important thing is to realize that all menopauses are not created equal. So we say a woman's in menopause when her ovaries aren't making a lot of estradiol anymore, the main estrogen made by the ovaries. But in fact, having your ovaries removed prior to the age of 50 runs you a much higher risk of Alzheimer's disease than if you kept your ovaries for the rest of your life. So those are two very different menopauses, and I actually call these the many menopauses, and I think it's critical to differentiate why women stop menstruating or stop making estradiol. The second thing I've learned is that it's so critical in order to get precision treatments to actually determine what kind of a treatment is this person getting. All estrogens are not created equal. And yet the literature is so unclear on these that we're not really going to be able to develop precision treatments until we get precise in our language and our thinking about these two really key factors. So that has really come out in my work, and it's certainly led me to think of places where innovation would be incredibly important. Women's health has led us to what I think is a much more realistic view of biology, which is biology is complex. You can't just have one variable and hold everything else constant. And when people say to me they're not studying women or they're not using female models because they're too complex, I say to them, you know, if we had been studying female models all along and somebody came up to us and said we had to start studying males, I would say they're not complex enough to really give us a good view on the complexity of biology.
Well, that's a mic drop moment to start us off. Gillian, thank you. Minna, over to you now. Can you introduce your work uncovering molecular mechanisms that determine pathogenesis of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, which we know increase the risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer?
Excellent. Thank you so much. So my name is Minna Woo, and I'm a clinician scientist. I'm an endocrinologist, and the nature of endocrinology, which is the study of hormones, the nature of my practice is it's predominantly women. So I do a lot of thyroid and diabetes and osteoporosis, and so there's a lot of women's health involved. And, you know, the facts are, until the 70s and even 80s, women were actually excluded from studies, like in clinical trials. So if you go back, and even something like in the 90s, NIH, they mandated. And then even CIHR, I've been in this business now for 25 years, and, when I would write grants to CIHR, I don't recall in the beginning stages, let's say 25 years ago, but only recently there's actually like a Sex and Gender Institute, and every grant that we have to write, we have to include how we are, addressing sex and gender issues. And sometimes, even though things should be done, and as a good scientist, you should, study men and women or females and males separately, because we are very, very different biologically. I mean, even if you look at cells in a dish or mice, whether you study mice in females or males, they're very, very different. So the human body is incredibly complex and sophisticated, and we find wonderful ways to, compensate so that, everything goes under the radar until they do not, and they then come to the doctor's office. So for a lot of these conditions, because they present decades after the instigating events or processes, we often have to rely on what we call preclinical models. So we rely on cells, or we study mice and transgenic mice, and really here we get to really hone in on the mechanistic aspects, because by the time they come with obesity and diabetes and heart disease, gazillion things have gone awry.
I'm wondering, can we go into some examples of way that your scientific research is shifting to real-world application to help impact women's health?
Until about 2 years ago, for far too long, I was chair of the advisory committee for the Institute of Gender and Health, which, to Canada's credit, is one of the original 13, I believe it's 13 institutes of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And I watched the Institute of Gender and Health over the years start with gender, actually, be about the social influences on males and females, and gradually then go over almost entirely to sex differences, which we think about as biological. And now, under the current chair, it's now much more blended into sex and gender, what we're calling sex and gender science. And I feel like I had an impact on that. And I think that's a very important place for us to be going. For a long time, we've been really strict about saying, okay, sex is biological, it's genes, it's hormones, and gender is social. But in fact, the social shapes the biological, and anybody who knows anything about endocrinology will know that the social world shapes what our endocrine system secretes, with the stress hormones being the most prevalently known, but they affect estradiol and testosterone secretion as well. So I think this blending of sex and gender, if we can figure out the methods that will allow us to study different fields at two such different levels, is actually going to lead to much more precise medicine and much more precise interventions.
I mean, have you seen material differences in the last 5 to 10 years? Are we on the right track? Are people ponying up the money in order to do this right?
I don't think people are ponying up the money the way it should be. I think a lot of the money, this is a very, very important area. A lot of the money in women's health is really going to women's reproductive health, and especially women's reproductive health in the global south. And that's really important. 50 years ago, being pregnant, it could be a death sentence. Childbirth is dangerous, and we've solved it for the most part in the global north. So I think it's important to have a lot of money going there, but I think there really has to now be a focus where we can, in places where we can afford to think about it, on the rest of the body and the whole body, the brain, the immune system, the cardiac system. We just really need to, it's different all over. An area of Alzheimer's disease that's getting it's very exciting to me in terms of understanding why more women than men have Alzheimer's disease, is looking at the unexpressed X. So for those of you who might not know, the X chromosome, women carry 2 X chromosomes, females carry 2 X chromosomes, but we can't express the second X. And it's random which X chromosome gets silenced, and it's not complete. So in every single cell, there's a little bit of an extra X expression. And that turns out to be really important for health and potentially for women's risk or resilience to Alzheimer's disease. So these areas, I think, are really critical to start exploring and understanding better.
And it's complex.
And it's complex.
How about you, Minna? The last 5 to 10 years, what's it been like for you in this way?
When I think back to the days where I would be on call for internship, and then I think now to all these wild and wonderful new drugs that we have available today, that the concept didn't even exist when I went to medical school, where I graduated in 1991. So I think that's just a testament to what an exciting advances that we have made, like HIV and viral hepatitis. And, these we would have never considered curable or treatable. And now, there are many, many people that are walking around, 30 plus more years because of new discoveries. But again, with the advances in science, we now have a very, very deeper understanding how, not just how women and men present differently, of course, but, the heterogeneity of many of these diseases. And, I focus on diabetes, but, how diabetes present in South Asians versus East Asians versus Blacks versus Indigenous. I mean, we could learn so much, and this is where, precision medicine comes in. And of course, this applies obviously to women and men as well. So we're sort of in an extremely exciting times. And, maybe I'm a little bit more naive than you are, but I'm very optimistic that we will make headways towards, personalized medicine. But we're a long ways there. Like, we need to really still understand a lot about these diseases at the deepest level.
So as we start to think about winding down this conversation, and there's so much to talk about, but can you both articulate what are some unmet needs as you see them in your respective fields, and where you would like to see advancement specifically?
I can hardly wait, and I'm optimistic. So I would say, first of all, just with respect to the ovaries, I would love some smart biophysicist to invent a way to image the ovaries so that we could follow healthy tissue over time and catch cancer early. And, I think the same problems with imaging that happen with the ovaries, being deep in the abdomen and hard to, you've got the heartbeat and a lot of fluids floating around, making imaging with a clear image difficult. The same problem for the pancreas. And pancreatic cancer also has this problem. So I would love to see a way to image the ovaries so we could follow them over time. The other thing I would love to see, and which probably will take AI, is sophisticated statistical methodologies that will allow us to really study complexity and study complexity over a lifespan so that we can look at somebody early in life with all the intersecting variables of their life experience as well as their biologies, and potentially make predictions about where those might go so that we can keep our eyes open to what might be happening early when intervention is possible. So I think that for me, those are two very important areas. The third place that I think is really important, but I think it's not at the level of innovation that those are, is that we need better databases. Our studies of those are only as good as the databases and the data that are collected. And if we don't collect good data about women's reproductive lives, if they had an oophorectomy, what kind of hormone therapy they're on, how many children they had is actually really important. As well as for men, multiple variances in life experiences, we're not going to get great data out of the databases. So the collection's really important too.
Minna, over to you.
We're so siloed. And what we're realizing is that it's a little bit more complex, and there's so much connection and crosstalk between different silos. So as an example, like let's say neuroscience, and we're trying to better understand Alzheimer's disease, neurodegeneration, and this interconnection between neuroscience and immunology. Because of the technology that we have available today, we're finding things that we would have never imagined before. This whole notion of being a specialist in one area could sort of be detrimental, and now going forward, we have to start talking to people, connecting interdisciplinary, and we gotta start working in teams, right? And we gotta, like the engineers and the immunologists and the cell biologists and the doctors, and we all have to sort of get together to have a holistic understanding, because as optimistic as I am, we're so far from really understanding many of these so complex diseases.
Complex, team-based, AI, lots to think about. Gillian, Minna, thank you so much for taking the stage today to have this critical conversation. Thank you.
Solve for X is brought to you by Mars, North America's largest urban innovation hub. Gab Harpel is our mix engineer, Jason McBride is our senior editor, Max Swain composed our theme song and all the music in this episode. Katherine Hayward is the executive producer. I'm Laura Torvey, filling in this week for our host, Manjula Selvaraja. Watch your feed for new episodes coming soon.
Solve for X is brought to you by Mars, North America's largest urban innovation hub and a registered charity. Mars supports startups and accelerates the adoption of high-impact solutions to some of the world's biggest challenges. For more information, visit marsdd.com. And we want to hear from you. Drop us a line to share your ideas, questions, and feedback. What innovations are you curious about? Email us at media@marsdd.com.